The sound of the splintering door was the last thing he heard before the world went sideways. One moment, Elias Vance was inside the skin of another man, a character named Rico. His world contained within the four walls of a dusty apartment, a fake gun held loosely in his hand, the script pages a map to a fictional soul. The next, the world was noise and fury, wood and plaster exploding inward as three figures in tactical gear burst through the threshold, weapons raised, their shouts a language of pure command. He didn't have time to process, to think, to explain. His body reacted before his mind could, a deep, cellular memory of what it meant to be a black man in a room that had just been breached by authority. He dropped the prop gun. It clattered against the hardwood floor, a hollow, plastic sound swallowed by the screaming. Hands up! Get on the ground, now! The commands were overlapping, a storm of sound and intention that left no room for nuance, no space for the truth. Elias was no longer an actor in a rehearsal. He was a target. His costume, a worn gray hoodie and baggy jeans, the uniform of the character he was playing, was now his indictment. He went down, not with a crash but with a controlled descent, the way a man does when he knows resistance is a death sentence. His palms hit the floorboards, the dust puffing up around his fingers. The pages of his script, his Bible for the last 6 months, scattered across the room, fluttering like wounded birds under the heavy stomp of tactical boots. A knee slammed into his back, forcing the air from his lungs. A cold, metallic click echoed near his ear as his wrists were bound behind him, the zip ties biting into his skin. He could feel the rough texture of the floor against his cheek, could smell the stale scent of old wood and the fresh, sharp odor of adrenaline, theirs and his own. He was pinned, powerless, his identity erased and replaced with a silhouette of their fear. He heard a voice, sharp and laced with triumphant certainty, belonging to the officer pressing him into the floor. "We got him," the voice said. "Suspect is secure." Elias closed his eyes. They had no idea who they had, and they had no idea what was coming for them. The silence that followed the initial storm was worse than the noise. It was a thick, heavy silence, punctuated by the labored breathing of the officers and the crackle of their radios. Elias lay on the floor, the pressure of a boot still planted firmly in the small of his back. He could see the world from a worm's eye view. The dust bunnies under the sofa, the edge of a worn rug, and the scattered pages of his script. One page lay near his face, a boot print stamped across a monologue he had spent weeks perfecting. The ink was smeared, the words rendered meaningless, a perfect metaphor for the moment. "It's a rehearsal," Elias managed to say, his voice muffled by the floor. "I'm an actor." The officer pressing him down, a young man with cold eyes and a jaw tight with aggression, didn't respond. He just adjusted his grip. Let's call him Miller. He was the point man, the one who had kicked in the door, the one whose certainty was an armor he wore more proudly than his vest. His partner, an older, heavier man named Davies, stood guard by the shattered doorway, his expression unreadable but complicit. He had seen this 100 times. He knew the script better than Elias did. "Please," Elias tried again, his words careful, measured. "My director is in the other room. We were running a scene." Miller finally spoke, his voice a low growl. "Shut up." It wasn't a request, it was an erasure. From the hallway, peering from behind their own doors, 2 neighbors watched. An elderly woman clutching her robe, her face a mask of fear and validation. A young man holding his phone, probably the one who had called the police, his eyes wide with a grim satisfaction. They saw the scene just as Miller did, a dangerous man neutralized, a threat contained, their fears justified. They didn't see the script pages. They didn't see the professional-grade camera set up on a tripod in the corner of the room, now knocked onto its side. They saw a black man in a hoodie, a gun on the floor, and armed men in control. The story wrote itself. A third person in the apartment, a young production assistant named Sarah, emerged from the small kitchen, her hands raised, her face pale with shock. "Wait, stop," she stammered. "This is a misunderstanding. We're shooting a movie." Davies turned, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm. "Stay where you are, ma'am." "But Sarah started, taking a step forward. Miller barked from across the room without looking up. "Get her out of here." Davies moved, grabbing Sarah by the arm, not violently but with an immovable force that brooked no argument. He steered her back toward the hallway. "You need to clear the area, ma'am. This is an active scene." "But you don't understand," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "He's the lead actor." Her words were lost in the static of the radio, dismissed as the frantic lies of an accomplice. Elias watched her being pushed out, a flicker of hope extinguished. He was alone again, pinned under the weight of their assumptions. He focused on his breathing, a technique he used for acting, for finding his center. Inhale, exhale. He had been in this scene before, not on a set, but in real life. Pulled over for driving a car they thought was too nice for him, followed in stores, watched with suspicion for simply existing. He knew the feeling of being presumed guilty, of having his identity stripped away and replaced by a caricature drawn from fear. But this was different. This time they had invaded his sanctuary, the one place where he could be anyone, create anything. They had trampled his art. He thought of the character Rico, a man pushed to the edge, a bank robber with a desperate heart. Elias had worked to find the humanity in him, the pain behind the rage. Now, lying on the floor with his hands bound, he didn't have to act. He felt Rico's desperation in his own bones. The humiliation, the helplessness, the slow burning fire of injustice. Miller shifted his weight, speaking into his shoulder mic. "Suspect in custody, no shots fired, apartment is secure." He sounded proud, efficient. A job well done. He had no idea he was standing in the middle of his own career-ending catastrophe. He had secured the suspect, but he had just let the truth off its leash, and it was coming for him. The apartment was still, but the air was electric. Elias lay there, cataloging the sensations. The bite of the zip ties, the ache in his back, the taste of dust in his mouth. He could hear Miller and Davies murmuring, their voices low and confident. They were running his name, checking for priors, building their case on a foundation of sand. They had found the prop gun and were handling it as if it were a loaded weapon, bagging it as evidence. They saw the costume and called it clothing. They saw the set and called it a crime scene. Their reality was impenetrable. Elias twisted his head just enough to see the corner of the room where the director's chair was supposed to be. It was empty. Julian Croft, the legendary director, a man known for his obsessive pursuit of realism, was supposed to be there, watching, guiding. He had a small monitor set up in the bedroom, allowing him to see the rehearsal without being in the room, preserving the raw energy of the performance. Elias wondered if he had seen the raid, if he knew what was happening, or had the chaos been too sudden, too violent. A new wave of despair washed over him. Maybe this was it. Maybe he'd be dragged out of his own rehearsal space, paraded in front of the neighbors, and booked. The story would hit the trades. Actor Elias Vance arrested in police raid. The context wouldn't matter. The headline would be the death of his career. The very role that was meant to be his breakthrough would become his ruin. All because a neighbor saw a black man with a prop and called the police, and the police saw a black man with a gun and saw a threat. A story as old as the country itself. He saw them pick up one of the script pages. Davies held it, squinting at the words. "Looks like some kind of writing," he said, his tone dismissive as if it were a curiosity, not a clue. "Probably song lyrics, or a manifesto," Miller grunted. He kicked another page aside with his boot. "Doesn't matter. We got him." Elias felt a surge of cold fury, a feeling he rarely allowed himself to access outside of a role. It was a clean, sharp anger. They weren't just erasing him, they were desecrating his work. That script was the culmination of months of research, of character work, of baring his own soul to find the truth in a fictional one. And they were treating it like trash. He closed his eyes, forcing himself back to his breath. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction. Wait. Then, a new sound. A door creaking open, not the shattered front door, but the door to the bedroom. Miller and Davies turned. A figure emerged, stepping out of the shadows of the other room and into the fractured light of the raided apartment. He was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, with a wild mane of silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 stories. He was wearing a simple black sweater and jeans, nothing that screamed authority. He looked at the scene, the overturned furniture, the officers in tactical gear, and Elias pinned on the floor, with a terrifyingly calm expression. He didn't gasp, he didn't shout, he just observed. Miller straightened up, his hand moving toward his hip. "Sir, you need to stay back. This is a police matter." The old man took another slow step into the room, his gaze sweeping over the scattered script pages on the floor. He bent down, his movements deliberate, and picked one up. He held it gently, his thumb brushing away the boot print smudge. He looked at the words, then looked at Elias. A flicker of something, not pity, but a deep, shared anger passed between them. "A police matter," the old man repeated, his voice quiet, yet it seemed to cut through the tension like a razor. "You seem to be confused about what's happening here." Davies shifted his weight, uneasy. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." The old man's eyes finally settled on Miller. It was a look of such profound, withering contempt that Miller, for the first time, seemed to falter. The armor of his certainty had found a crack. "Leave," the old man said, a dangerous smile playing on his lips. He held up the script page. "You burst into my set. You assault my lead actor. You destroy my script. And you're asking me to leave." He took one more step, and the entire balance of power in the room began to tilt on its axis. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow louder than all their shouting. "You're not in a crime scene. You're in my movie." Julian Croft let the words hang in the air, a declaration that reshaped the reality of the room. Miller and Davies exchanged a look of pure confusion. The name, the face, they didn't recognize him. To them, he was just some old man, an unexpected complication. They were still operating from their script, the one where they were the heroes, the restorers of order. "Your movie," Miller scoffed, trying to reclaim his footing. "Sir, we had a 911 call reporting a man with a firearm. We found this individual." He gestured dismissively toward Elias, matching the description. "The weapon is on the floor. Julian's eyes, cold and sharp, darted to the prop gun lying in an evidence bag. "The weapon," he said, the words dripping with scorn. "You mean the non-firing rubber prop from the studio's props department, the one I personally approved for this scene." He took a step closer, his quiet demeanor a stark contrast to the violence of their entry. "Did you check it? Did you even look at it before you tackled a man and put your boot on his neck?" Davies hesitated. "We have to assume every weapon is real, sir. It's protocol." "Protocol," Julian echoed, the word tasting like poison. "Your protocol is to break down a door without announcing yourselves and assault the first black man you see. Your protocol is to ignore the professional-grade film camera your partner just kicked over. Your protocol is to trample all over a screenplay and call it a manifesto." His voice never rose, but its intensity bent the air. He turned his gaze to the shattered door frame. "That door is from a 1920s brownstone. It's a custom build. It costs $12,000. Who's paying for that?" Miller's face hardened. "Look, I don't know who you think you are." "Who I think I am?" Julian let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. "My name is Julian Croft." The name landed, not with a bang, but with a slow, dawning horror. Davis's eyes widened. Even in the dim light of the wrecked apartment, a flicker of recognition ignited. Julian Croft, the director, the two-time Oscar winner, the man whose films were cultural events, whose name was synonymous with cinematic genius. Miller still looked blank for a second, the name not registering in his world of precincts and patrol routes. Davies nudged his partner, whispering urgently, "Miller, that's Julian Croft, the director." The information finally broke through Miller's wall of certainty. He stared at Julian, then at Elias on the floor and back at the camera on its side. The pieces were there, but his mind refused to assemble them in the way they were now pointing. It couldn't be. Julian saw the doubt, the struggle. He savored it. "Yes, Julian Croft. And this," he said, his voice dropping as he gestured with the script page toward Elias, "is not your suspect. This is Elias Vance. He is the star of my film. He is the most gifted, disciplined, and transformative actor of his generation. And you have him zip-tied on the floor of my set with your boot on his back." He let that sink in. He looked directly at Miller, his eyes boring into him. "So let me ask you again, what protocol are you following, officer?" The silence was absolute. The radios had gone quiet. The neighbors were gone from the hallway. It was just the five of them. Two disgraced officers, one legendary director, one vindicated production assistant, and the man at the center of it all, still on the floor, listening. Elias felt the pressure on his back lessen. Miller had unconsciously taken his boot off. It was a small movement, but it was a tectonic shift. The power had not just tilted, it had flipped, completely and irrevocably. "He had a gun," Miller stammered, the words weak, a pathetic defense against the tidal wave of reality that was crashing down on him. "He had a prop," Julian countered instantly. "He was in costume. He was in a pre-approved, registered filming location, a fact your dispatch could have confirmed with a single phone call to the film commission if you had bothered to check." "But you didn't, did you?" Julian didn't wait for an answer. He turned his attention to Davies. "And you're the veteran, I presume. You stood by and let this happen. You saw the camera, you saw the script, you heard him say he was an actor, and you did nothing." Davies looked down at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. The shame was a visible thing, a heat rising from his collar. Julian walked over to where Elias lay. He knelt, not with pity but with a profound, shared respect. "Elias," he said softly, "are you all right?" "I'm fine, Julian," Elias replied, his voice steady though his body ached. Julian's jaw tightened. He looked at the zip ties cutting into Elias's wrists. His gaze then lifted, finding Miller's. "Take them off," he said. It wasn't a request. It was an order delivered with the weight of a king. Miller hesitated, a final, flickering ember of defiance in his eyes. "I can't do that, sir. He has to be processed." Julian stood up slowly, a predator uncoiling. His voice became dangerously soft. "Processed for what? For acting while black. For rehearsing a scene in a hoodie." "You listen to me very carefully. You have two options. Option one, you take those cuffs off my actor right now. You and your partner walk out that door, and you pray that I'm satisfied with ending your careers. Option two, you leave him on that floor for one more second, and I will personally finance a lawsuit that will not only strip you of your badges, but will dismantle your entire precinct's funding for the next decade. I will own your houses. I will garnish your pensions. I will make it my personal mission to ensure that the name Miller is a cautionary tale taught at the academy for the next 50 years. He took a breath, letting the threat settle in the now freezing air. "So, what's it going to be, Officer Miller? Do you feel lucky?" Miller stared, his face pale, his bravado completely gone, shattered into a million pieces at his feet. He looked at Davies, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. It was over. Miller swallowed hard, pulled out a small blade, and knelt. With a final, humiliating snip, the zip ties fell away. Elias's hands were free. The moment the zip ties were cut, a current of relief and pain shot through Elias's arms. He stayed on the floor for a beat, letting the blood rush back into his hands, the pins and needles a dull roar. He didn't want them to see him wince. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Julian Croft stood over him like a sentinel, his eyes still locked on Miller, ensuring the officer didn't make another mistake. Miller backed away, his movements clumsy, all his earlier tactical grace gone. He looked like a child who had been caught breaking something precious and had no idea how to fix it. Davies was already inching toward the doorway, his face a grim mask of regret. He wanted out. He wanted to be anywhere but there. Elias pushed himself up slowly, first to his knees, then to his feet. He rubbed his wrists, the red marks from the plastic ties a stark testament to the last 20 minutes. He looked around the room. His sanctuary. It was in shambles. The door was a wreck of splintered wood. His script, his work, was scattered and dirty. His body ached, but he was standing, and they were not. "Get out," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of the earlier fire, now just cold, hard finality. "Both of you." Miller opened his mouth, perhaps to offer an apology, a pathetic, last-ditch effort to salvage something from the wreckage of his career. Julian cut him off with a single look. Don't you dare say you're sorry. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry the man you racially profiled and assaulted happens to be the face of $100 million film. You're sorry he has me in his corner." He paused, letting the distinction land with the force of a physical blow. "Your apology means nothing. Now get out of my set." Without another word, Miller and Davies turned and walked through the ruined doorway. They didn't look back. The sounds of their boots faded down the hall, followed by the quiet click of a neighbor's door shutting. They were gone. The silence they left behind was different. It was a clean slate. The air, once thick with tension and aggression, was now just still. Sarah, the production assistant, peeked back in, her eyes wide. She saw Elias standing, saw Julian, and rushed over. "Elias, are you okay? We called the studio, they're sending legal there." "I'm okay, Sarah," Elias said, managing a small, tired smile. He looked at Julian. "Thank you." Julian just nodded, the fierce anger in his eyes softening into something else, a deep, weary sadness. He walked over and picked up the trampled script page he'd been holding earlier. He smoothed it out as best he could and handed it to Elias. "We'll get you a new copy." Elias took the page. He looked at the smeared words, the footprint. This page, this scene, would forever be part of the story now. Not the film's story, but his. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his pocket. A souvenir from the ugliest kind of performance. Julian surveyed the room. "We'll have to find a new location. This one's compromised." He wasn't just talking about the broken door. He meant the energy, the memory of the violation. The art couldn't live here anymore. Elias walked over to the window and looked down at the street below. He could see a police cruiser pulling away from the curb, its lights off, retreating into the anonymity of the city. He thought about the officers inside. They had jobs, families. They probably thought they were doing the right thing, but their right thing was his nightmare. Their protocol was his pain. He had won. Julian had ensured it, but it felt like a hollow victory. The triumph was real. The satisfaction of seeing their power crumble was undeniable, but the wound was still fresh. He turned back to Julian, who was now quietly directing Sarah to start documenting the damage for the insurance claim, his mind already shifting to the logistics of recovery. The director, always moving forward. Elias looked down at his own hands. They were free. He flexed his fingers, feeling the muscles respond. These hands were his tools. They could hold a prop gun and create a character. They could hold a pen and sign a contract. They could hold a script and bring words to life. For a few minutes they had been bound, rendered useless by men who saw them only as a threat. But they were his hands, his power. Julian walked over and stood beside him, following his gaze out the window. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The sounds of the city drifted up, a world that had no idea what had just transpired in this small, dusty apartment. "They see the hoodie," Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. "They never see the man inside it." Julian placed a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture of physical comfort from the famously reserved director. "Today," he said, his voice firm, full of a quiet, unshakable promise, "they saw the man, and they will never forget him." That was the truth. Some victories aren't won with fists or weapons, but with the quiet, undeniable weight of your own existence. And some reckonings don't end with an arrest, but with the silent, permanent record of respect finally, brutally, earned.